The call came at 6:47 in the morning. I was already awake, already dressed, already standing at my kitchen window looking at 4 feet of snow that had fallen overnight on Ridgecrest Hollow, and listening to the silence that only happens when a neighborhood is completely buried and nobody is going anywhere. The person calling was Beverly Hutchins, HOA president of Ridgecrest Hollow Community Association, the same Beverly Hutchins who had sent me a certified letter 8 weeks earlier informing me that my commercial snow removal equipment was prohibited from being stored or operated within the development, and that I had 30 days to remove it from the property or face fines. I let the phone ring 4 times before I answered it. She said, "Gary, we have a situation." I said, "Beverly, I know." She said the roads were impassable, and the county plow had gotten stuck at the entrance, and the ambulance that had been called for Margaret Solis on Birchwood Court could not get through, and she needed to know if I could help. I looked at my tractor sitting in the garage where it had been sitting legally since she had decided it was an eyesore. Then I looked at my contract, which my attorney had prepared 8 weeks ago for exactly this moment. I told Beverly I could absolutely help. I told her my rate for emergency residential snow removal was $90 per hour with a 4-hour minimum, that I required a signed contract before I started the equipment, and that I could have the contract at her door in 7 minutes. She said, "Gary, this is an emergency." I said, "Beverly, I know. Stay with me, because what happened over the next 14 hours settled a 2-year dispute in one morning and produced a written community policy that is still protecting equipment rights in Ridgecrest Hollow today. My name is Gary Kowalski, and I have lived at 22 Ridgecrest Hollow Drive for 16 years. I operate a small residential and commercial snow removal and landscaping business from my property, which I started 12 years ago and which has grown steadily into a full-service operation covering 14 residential accounts and 3 commercial lots. The equipment I use in this business includes a John Deere utility tractor with a front blade and rear snowblower attachment, a skid steer loader with a pusher blade, and a commercial-grade truck-mounted spreader for de-icing applications. This equipment represented a significant capital investment that I had made over 12 years and that I maintained meticulously, because maintained equipment is reliable equipment, and reliable equipment is a service business's only real product. The equipment was stored on my property in a dedicated equipment bay I had built onto my garage 8 years ago with a county building permit, designed specifically to house the tractor and the skid steer with proper clearances and drainage. The bay was not visible from the street, set behind the main garage and screened on the road-facing side by a mature arborvitae hedge that I had planted specifically to address any visual concern. The equipment was clean, properly maintained, registered and insured, and had never caused any problem to any neighbor in the 8 years it had been stored there. Beverly Hutchins had been HOA president for 22 months when the certified letter arrived. Beverly was a person who came to every situation with a binder, which is not a criticism of binders, but is a description of a specific type of governing temperament, one that privileges the written rule over the practical situation, and that finds unauthorized deviations from standard conditions more troubling than the consequences of rigidly enforcing standards in conditions where they do not apply. She had a background in insurance adjusting, which had trained her to see the world in terms of risk categories and compliance requirements, and she applied this lens to the HOA with an efficiency that produced a high volume of notices and a low tolerance for the kind of informal accommodation that neighborly communities run on. Her complaint about my equipment had a technical basis that I will acknowledge. The HOA's land use guidelines included a provision that prohibited the outdoor storage of commercial vehicles and commercial equipment on residential properties within the development. The provision had been written years before I bought my property and had been aimed at preventing residents from running commercial trucking operations from residential lots, the kind of arrangement that produces a fleet of 18-wheelers parked on residential streets. My equipment was not 18-wheelers parked on a residential street. It was working landscaping and snow removal machinery stored inside an enclosed equipment bay on my own property. But the provision's language was broad enough that Beverly had concluded it applied, and the HOA's attorney had told her there was an argument for it, and Beverly had sent the letter. My attorney, a woman named Sandra Poole, who had been handling agricultural and small business property matters for 20 years, reviewed the provision and the situation, and told me that Beverly's reading was not frivolous, but that it was not inevitable either. The provision's purpose, which could be argued from its drafting history, had been to address outdoor storage and commercial vehicle traffic, not enclosed storage of professional equipment on properties where that equipment served local residents. Sandra said we had a reasonable case for a professional use exception, similar to the kind that many HOA governing documents allowed for home-based businesses, and that we should pursue it through the proper channels before doing anything else. I submitted a formal exception request to the Architectural Review Committee, documenting the equipment storage location, the enclosed bay, the screening, the absence of commercial traffic to my property because I drove the equipment to client sites rather than having clients come to me, and the 14 years of storage without complaint from any neighbor. I included letters from 3 neighbors who had lived adjacent to my property for years and who stated that they had never been aware of any nuisance or visual impact from my equipment storage. I included my insurance documentation and my business license. The committee reviewed it over 6 weeks and returned with a denial. The denial was signed by Beverly. The reason given was that the provision did not include a professional use exception and that the committee did not have authority to create one, which was technically accurate in the same way that a great deal of unhelpful bureaucratic reasoning is technically accurate. Sandra filed an appeal with the full board. The full board voted 4-1 to uphold the denial. The one vote in my favor was a board member named Ed Garrity, a retired contractor who told me afterward that he had voted against it because it was common sense and he still had some. The certified letter and the 30-day removal notice followed the board's vote. Sandra prepared our response, which challenged the provision's applicability to enclosed private storage and put the board on notice that we intended to pursue the matter further. She also prepared, at my request, a service contract for emergency snow removal that I could execute quickly if the situation warranted it, because I had been running snow removal in this region for 12 years, and I knew what the winters looked like, and I had a good idea of how the winter was likely to look for a development that had just prohibited the only commercial-grade snow removal equipment within its boundaries. I stored my equipment in the bay as I always had. I did not remove it. Sandra's challenge was pending, and Beverly's fines were being accumulated into a file that Sandra described as a growing record of disputed assessments with no legal basis. The storm that produced the situation arrived on a Thursday in February. The forecast had been tracked by me for 5 days with professional attention because I had 12 client accounts to service, and a significant weather event required advanced preparation in terms of equipment staging and client communication. The models showed a potential for 36 to 48 inches of snowfall in our region over a 30-hour period, which was the kind of event that happened once or twice a decade and that required a different response than a routine winter storm. I had prepositioned my equipment, communicated with my clients, arranged for a helper, and laid in supplies. What the forecast had not fully resolved, and what became clear as the storm developed overnight Thursday into Friday, was that the heaviest snowfall band was tracking directly over our region. By 4 a.m. Friday, the automated weather station at the county airport was reporting accumulations of 3 inches per hour. By the time the storm ended late Friday afternoon, the official measurement at the station was 51 inches over 28 hours. In Ridgecrest Hollow, which sat in a bowl-shaped valley that tended to accumulate additional depth from wind redistribution, the measured depth in my driveway at 6 a.m. Friday was 54 inches. 54 inches is 4.5 feet of snow. To give you a sense of what that means practically, a standard residential snowblower, the kind that homeowners use for typical winter storms, becomes largely ineffective above about 18 inches of accumulation. A residential plow truck, the kind that many HOA maintenance contracts used for routine winter services, could operate in up to about 30 inches with difficulty. Above 30 inches, The equipment that moved the snow efficiently was commercial-grade machinery with the kind of power and capacity that I operated professionally. My John Deere tractor with the front blade and rear snowblower combination was designed for exactly this kind of event. It would move 54 inches of snow the way a homeowner's blower moved 6. The development snow removal contract was with a landscaping company called Greenview Services, which sent a truck-mounted plow for routine snow events. Greenview's truck had been dispatched when the storm began and had gotten approximately 40 feet into the development's main road before becoming high-centered on the accumulation, the snow depth exceeding the truck's ground clearance. The driver had tried to back out, and the truck had slid into the drainage swale along the road shoulder, where it was lodged at an angle. This had happened at approximately 4 a.m. By 6 a.m., the truck was still in the swale and the development's roads were uncleared. The county road that served as the main access to Ridgecrest Hollow was similarly blocked. The county plow that served our route had made one pass before the accumulation rate exceeded the rate of clearing, and a second attempt at approximately 5 a.m. had ended with the county plow becoming stuck at the development's entrance, blocking the only vehicle access point. County dispatch had been notified and was prioritizing equipment deployment across multiple stuck situations across the county, and the estimated time for a recovery crew to reach Ridgecrest Hollow was 4 to 6 hours. Margaret Solis on Birchwood Court had suffered what was later confirmed to be a cardiac event overnight. Her husband Frank had called 911 at 6:20 a.m. The ambulance had been dispatched and had reached the county road entrance to Ridgecrest Hollow at 6:38, where it had been stopped by the stuck county plow blocking the road. The paramedics had gotten out of the ambulance and had been attempting to assess the situation when Beverly called me at 6:47. I want to be precise about the contract conversation because it is the part of this story that people sometimes misunderstand. I did not hold Beverly hostage. I did not refuse to help until she signed. What I did was insist on a contract before starting, because Sandra had specifically advised me that operating equipment in a situation where the HOA disputed my right to store it, without a documented agreement governing the operation, created legal ambiguity that was not in my interest. The contract Sandra had prepared was clear, fair, and brief, 3 paragraphs covering the service rate, the payment terms, the scope of work, and an explicit statement that my operation of the equipment on this occasion did not constitute an admission that my equipment storage was impermissible or that Beverly's removal notice was valid. It was not an instrument of extraction. It was professional documentation of a professional service. Beverly was at my door in 4 minutes. She had clearly run from her house, which was 2 lots down, because she was breathing harder than the cold air alone would explain. I had the contract printed and waiting. She read it in less than a minute. She signed it. I told her to step back from the garage door. The tractor started on the first turn, the way a properly maintained machine starts, and I had the blade and blower configuration deployed in 3 minutes and was moving down my driveway in 4. The sound of a commercial-grade tractor working through heavy accumulation is not subtle. It is a steady, authoritative roar that tells everyone within earshot that something with real power is addressing the situation, and I heard doors opening in nearby houses as I came down the drive and turned onto the main road. The county plow at the entrance was my first target because clearing the entrance cleared the ambulance access. The plow had embedded itself in a drift that had built up against its forward plow blade, which had been left in the down position when the operator got stuck, creating a dam effect. I approached from the side, cleared the drift around the front of the plow in 4 passes, and the county operator, who had been standing beside his truck, watching with the expression of a man who had been having a very bad morning, gave me a thumbs up and was able to back his truck clear of the entrance within 10 minutes. The ambulance moved through at 6:59. Margaret Solis was transporting to the hospital. She survived. I learned this later from Frank, who came to my door 3 days after the storm to thank me personally. He was a quiet man, and he did not use many words, but the words he used were ones I will not forget. He said that 12 minutes had made the difference in his wife's outcome, according to the paramedics. From the time Beverly signed my contract to the time the ambulance moved through the entrance was 12 minutes. I cleared the development's roads over the following 9 hours. The skid steer handled the tighter sections near the cul-de-sacs and the main road access to each court. The tractor handled the primary circulation roads. My helper Kevin ran the truck-mounted spreader behind me on the cleared sections to address the ice layer that underlaid the snowfall. By 4 p.m., every road in Ridgecrest Hollow was passable and treated, and Greenview's plow truck had been extracted from the swale by a recovery service and removed. Beverly brought me a check at 4:30. It covered the full contract amount, 14 hours at the hourly rate plus the materials cost for the de-icing compound, totaling $1,120. She stood at my door in the late afternoon light, which had that specific winter quality of exhausted brightness, and she looked like a person who had been through something and was still processing it. She said, "Gary, we need to talk about the equipment policy." I told her I agreed, and that Sandra would reach out to the HOA's attorney the following week. The policy conversation took 6 weeks. Sandra and the HOA's attorney negotiated a professional use amendment to the land use guidelines that created a clear exemption for professionally operated equipment stored in enclosed private structures on properties where the operation did not generate commercial traffic to the site. The amendment was presented to the full membership for a vote, which was required under the charter for any change to the land use guidelines. It passed 29-4. The 4 votes against were Beverly, Craig, and 2 others whose names I did not know but whose positions I understood. The amendment is in the governing documents. Ed Garrity, the one dissenting vote from the original denial, was the board member who moved for its adoption. He told me at the community meeting where it was voted on that he had been waiting for a chance to fix that particular piece of the guidelines for 2 years and that he was glad the situation had finally made it possible. I told him I was glad too, though I had hoped the situation would not have required quite this level of demonstration to get there. He laughed and said that some people needed to see a thing to believe it. He was right about that. Beverly did not seek a 3rd term. The election the following November produced Ed as president, which the neighborhood received with the quiet relief of a community that had been through a stressful period and was ready for a different approach. Ed's first act as president was to review the snow removal contract with Greenview and add a provision requiring that any storm forecast to exceed 24 inches trigger a consultation with the county highway department about road clearance capacity before the storm, and a provision requiring that the board identify any equipment resources available within the development that could supplement commercial services in the event of a major event. Ed asked me to be listed as a supplemental resource. I told him I was glad to be listed and that my contract was on file with Sandra anytime they needed it. The tractor is in the bay where it has always been. The skid steer is beside it. The hedge along the roadside is 3 years fuller than it was when Beverly filed her complaint and provides screening that even the most dedicated inspector would find difficult to object to. I service my 14 residential accounts and my 3 commercial lots, and I come home to my own street and my own neighbors, who know who I am and what I do, and who have my number if they need it. Frank Solis still waves at me from his driveway when I drive past. Every time, without fail, 12 minutes. Some things are worth knowing. I knew it. Eventually, Beverly knew it too. The difference was that I had known it from the beginning and had prepared accordingly, and she had learned it at 6:47 on a February morning when there was 4.5 feet of snow on the ground and 1 machine in Ridgecrest Hollow that could move it. That machine was mine. It still is. == thumbnail text ===. She banned my plow, then called me at 6 a.m. when the ambulance couldn't get through.